Good morning, viewers, and welcome back to the Tobago Updates morning show, coming to you here live from the Port Mall in Scarborough, Tobago. We're just at about 7:11 a.m. this morning, and in this first segment, we are chatting with Senator the Honorable Lawrance Hislop this morning as we chat on some what may be general concerns happening at the national and the local level here, Trinidad and Tobago, and more specifically the Tobago House of Assembly. Good morning to you and welcome.
Morning, Julien. How are you doing? Morning, Tobago. It's good to be here.
All right. So as we get the conversation started this morning, the first area we want to touch on is the Auditor General's report. We have had a recent report produced in 2022 coming forward to us, and we note coming out of the recent press conference of the Tobago Council of the People's National Movement that you would have identified some concerns. So let's start from there, some of the issues that would have been raised.
Well, just to reiterate the point that the political leader made at the press conference, and just to re-emphasize the point as we drill down into what the Auditor General identified, there were two concerns that came out of that Auditor General's report that we wanted to highlight, or that we did highlight at the press conference. And one was the procurement procedures that were missing. Because as the Auditor General said, procurement procedures were not presented for audit examination. Therefore, it is not possible to verify whether proper procurement procedures were followed for the development program. And this speaks directly to a couple of the projects that we have highlighted over the period of time that this administration has been in office. Primarily, the road at Dutch Fort, the one at Shervan, the one at Pigeon Point, that we could see clearly that there were no proper procurement procedures. And we highlighted it before the Auditor General highlighted it. And this is a cause for concern, because we kept reiterating the fact that these sole select projects, these projects that came out of, or these sole select contractors that came out of the woodworks, out of nowhere, stucco and roofing contractors. Those are things that we spoke to even before the Auditor General highlighted it. The other thing that we drilled down into was a letter via email that was sent to an assemblyman, and the Auditor General identified the fact that that is not the normal procedure within the public service. We noticed that during the budget debate, one of the assemblymen, one of the councillors, Councillor Skeete Williams, attempted to point that in the direction of the People's National Movement. But that book road that the Auditor General spoke to directly has to do with the paving project that was done, or the paving that was done prior to the goat race and so on. That major paving that took place in Buku. So the Auditor General highlighted these things, but those things were identified before the Auditor General wrote about it or spoke to it in their report. We at the Tobago Council brought those things to the fore. There were concerns about the way contracts were given, the timelines contracts were given, the haste in which contracts were given, and we kept asking the question, why the haste, why the short time frame, why the rush? Emergency works that were clearly not emergency works.
Would you say that it becomes a matter of perspective depending on where you sit, in terms of, just as you mentioned in the latter part, what is defined as emergency works versus another? We have seen it coming out of the last administration, and we are seeing it being used by this current administration. How do you respond when you make the comparison of both?
No, but it's not a matter of perspective. It's a matter of proper procedures not being followed. There are clear guidelines as to how you go about issuing contracts. The RFP sent out. There are tenders that come in. You verify, and on top of that, the contractors must be registered. And Tobago was at the forefront of that. The contractors must be registered with the procurement unit. And what we saw is that a lot of these contractors are not only in the development aspect of road surfacing and so on. We talk about the school repair projects. A lot of these contractors, we found out, were not registered with the procurement unit, and if they were not, they were rushed to be registered so that they could fall within within the requirements. But it is not because or a different perspective based on where you sit. There are procedures that were not followed. There were procedures, there were flaws in the tendering process that we identified, and it took. And I want to go back to this that the Auditor General's report was always a report that the administration, the present administration, now when they were in opposition, was always something that they referred to. They always waived the Auditor General's report, always identified things from the Auditor General's report. So it is not for us, it's not a matter of perspective, but it's a matter of following the correct procedures.
How do we get to the point where the Auditor General's report actually holds some weight? And by that I mean, you made a very good reference in terms of the former administration utilizing references from the Auditor General report in the context of the Tobago House of Assembly. But it is important to note that these are concerns usually raised broadly over central government. The same report to which you're referring alludes to the fact that there are over 100 accounts from just over 10 or so ministries and different sections where it is that they would not have presented in a timely manner to facilitate reconciliation. Right. How do we get to the point where it is these things are not only reported or highlighted and then used for political mileage, but rather there is some kind of holding persons accountable, both at the local, the Tobago House of Assembly, and the national level?
Well, Julien, it speaks to a change in the way we do business. And there has to be a will by individuals, whether it is at the THA level or at central government level. There has to be a will by the persons responsible. And we also have to bear in mind that in a lot of regards, there are various officers at different levels with responsibilities. And some officers don't see the need to fulfill their responsibilities as they should. And it should redound to a need by individuals to do what is right. If I go to work, I must be able to honestly put in a day's work fairly and do what I am supposed to do, what is required of me. But we want to go back. I want for us to not lose focus when it comes to the procurement procedures. If the procurement procedures are followed as they should, especially in this regard, then we would not have been in this position. And even the area that the Auditor General identified, where the contractor wrote directly to a secretary, to an assemblyman, detailing whatever it is in that letter, that is cause for concern. Because as was identified by the political leader, that has never happened. We've never seen that happen in previous administrations, where you have contractors writing directly to assemblymen about a contract. And this is not only about the Buku Road, but there's also the issue of the jetty at Speyside and so on, when they're speaking to a visit at an office of an assemblyman as it relates to that contract. These things ought not to happen. And that's what we're speaking to. We're speaking about those things highlighted in the Auditor General's report that speak to a clear breach of procedure.
All right, viewers, we take a break at this point, and we want to remind you that we'll be right back. Have no fear. We'll be right back with the Honorable Lawrance Hislop here on set with us this morning. We want to remind you that this is your opportunity to share the live, share the live, share the live.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning, viewers, and welcome back. We just had about 7:22 a.m. This morning here on the Tobago Updates Morning Show. We continue the conversation with the Honorable Lawrance Hislop, a senator in the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. And we just started by looking at the Auditor General's report. And one of the concerns that you would have raised more specifically in terms of procurement procedures, do you see the new regulations that would have been passed in terms of the, looking at the OPR now introduced in Trinidad and Tobago? Do you see that working for the overall benefit and even addressing some of the concerns that you've raised? Because as you rightfully said, the Auditor General's report spoke to issues of the procurement procedures were not presented to audit in the circumstances. Do you see that working for us and the contributions that were made to get us to this point where we actually now have it as law?
Well, any piece of legislation, and I was sharing with someone recently that legislation is a living, breathing thing. And so as time progresses, you can make the necessary changes to the legislation. I saw some concerns raised in the national landscape about what transpired during the CARICOM summit. And the Minister of Finance spoke to it in detail. And I like the fact that he said that there are amendments that need to be made, even though the legislation was recently passed. But persons have to remember that the legislation has been in the domain for quite some time, and the government just got to the point that, listen, we need to pass the legislation. Let's pass the legislation. Let's enact it, and let's see where the flaws are, where the loopholes are, and as time progresses, you make the necessary changes. Procurement legislation is important because it acts as a check and balance on how we do business. And we have complained over and over again in this country about corruption. And so if you have a piece of legislation that speaks to, at some level, it may not necessarily alleviate completely corruption, but it creates a check and balance on how we do business, on who we do business with, and why we do business. I think it's important. I think it's necessary. I think the new law is important for us. It is going to create an even greater, as we said before, check and balance on how we do business, and I think it is important.
How do you respond to the concerns that have been raised, of course, just as you heard, nationally and even locally, that it has been introduced in a kind of draconian manner where a number of suppliers, so to speak, have been caught in a situation where they are not registered at the national level? Because, of course, for some time now, we would have had operating here in Tobago, seeking to have our very own registration and, rigorous process for procurement and so on, and persons being registered here. However, up to my most recent information in terms of trainings and so on, it is understood that even while efforts would have been made to have that list at the level of the Tobago House of Assembly conveyed to the OPR, that's a clear no. Each supplier, each contractor, each person wanting to put forward services has an individual responsibility. What happens in the interim in terms of the acquisition of services and so on from the part of government and state-owned entities and the implications that it comes with?
Well, then again, you speak to the personal responsibility, and I must give commendation to previous, and this is not just because I'm P&M, but previous P&M administration, or the previous P&M administration, that would have made sure that outside of even the law being fully enacted, that the procurement unit and the procurement procedures were set up in Tobago. To the extent that the regulator at the time spoke very highly about what the THA was doing, and it speaks a lot about who we are as Tobagonians. And so, yes, I understand that there was a desire to just move the list wholeheartedly into the procurement regulation database, but there was a desire by those responsible that each contractor should then register individual responsibility. We could argue on whether that was really effective or not, but it still speaks to the fact that you have to be registered nationally, and it gives an opportunity not only for the public sector, but it gives an opportunity for private sector to peruse the listing of contractors, the registered contractors, and work within that framework. And I think it augurs well. I think it is good for us. I know it is taking a while, and I wouldn't say it's draconian because the way it was implemented, because the law was there, the information was there for quite some time, and we knew it was coming. I think what may be seen as draconian by business persons is the requirements. And we have operated in this country for so long from a standpoint of however it hang it swing. When if we do things, because you recognize that you have to be up to date with your taxes, with your NIS, and all of these things benefit the employee of these companies, Because if you're working for a company for 10 years and they deducting NIS from your salary every month, every fortnight, and for whatever reason the employer is not crediting that to you when it's time for you to retire and you go into national insurance and they tell you your contributions ain't reach up. Who do we hold responsible? And so with this procurement legislation, it triggers a lot of things that businesses would have gotten away with. Taxes may not have been up to date. National insurance. So it triggers things like that so that companies, employers know they can't duck from it, as we say. They have to if they want to do business with the government, you have to come up to scratch.
The other area that we want to touch on is the late payment of salaries happening within the Tobago House of Assembly. We are seeing this situation in some instances through the division of food production and some others. Some are making the direct connection to the fact of funds not necessarily coming on time as it should from central government. How do you respond to that broader concern of late salaries within the Tobago space?
No, it has a serious effect, not only on the individuals who are not being paid, and it is really unfortunate that that employees have to be going through this, especially at a time when the children are at home, and we know when children are home from school, they eat out the house more than when they're in school, and also the children want to be involved in activities during this August holiday, and so it's unfortunate, it's sad that employees have to be going through that. We have employees who have not been paid 3 fortnights, and I really would like the administration or the spokespersons for the administration to quit the blame game at central government that the money isn't coming. Because I am positive that if we had a situation in this island where releases were not coming on a timely manner from central government, we would have heard about it, Julien. We would not have heard the end of it from the Secretary of Finance and the Economy. And so I want to make the point that I don't believe the issue is the releases of funds from central government. I believe it has to do with how those releases are managed in a timely manner. And we should not be in a position, or we have not been in this position for quite some time, where employees are complaining that they're not being paid on time. Why is it that you have workers going 3 fortnights without salary?
Do you think it's a matter of experience versus inexperience? The PNM would have been there for an extended amount of time. You have found ways around it, because we know that the way in which the payment for these employees are set up are not ideal, because it's part of the development program versus recurrent expenditure. Do you think it's a matter of experience versus inexperience now in terms of managing the affairs, particularly with the scenario in terms of treating with salaries out of a DP vote?
I think it's about priorities. That's what I think it is. I think the issue is about where are your priorities, because we're finding monies for other things, but we are unable to find the money for salaries, for payments to workers. So it's not, to me, it's not experience. I just think that if your priorities are in the right place, then you'd be able to treat with your staff, you'd be able to pay salaries on time. So I'm not going to put it down to experience. I think primarily, it may be an experience issue, but I think it's primarily about where your priorities lie.
All right, as we prepare to close this morning, unfortunately, I'm being told that we're out of time. Very quickly, I want to get your perspective. We've had the budget presented at the level of the Tobago House of Assembly. We're heading towards what would be the national budget. Can we look forward to seeing the goodly senator in the parliament advocating for more for Tobago, even if it is a matter of different administrations operating at the level of the Tobago House of Assembly versus you having a direct voice along with the other members of parliament in central government?
As I said in another place, I will always be in favor of more for Tobago. The question you have to ask is, when you've not done what you should do with what you consider as little, then what would you do? What would you do when you receive more? And I also want to make this point that when you juxtapose, or when you put the comparison between what was considered little or what is considered little by previous administrations and what have been done or what has been done with the little by previous administrations, it begs the question, if you can't manage little, if we have a situation with salaries not being paid and all of this and your priorities being messed up with little, what's going to happen with more? I want to remind Tobago that this administration has received the larger chunk or has received more than any other administration in the last 5 years. This is the last budget allocation was $125 million more than previous administrations. And so I will always advocate for more because Tobago is deserving of more. But when you receive the more, how are you going to manage the more that you get?
All right. Thank you very much, Senator the Honorable Lawrance Hislop. We got to leave it there this morning, folks. Joining us here on set, we want to say thank you very much for continuing to bring forward those perspectives and certainly giving his commitment to putting Tobago first. I think that's a safe statement to say, for putting Tobago first, no matter the circumstances, even if he may have concerns with the management here on the island by the current administration. We want to thank you very much, viewers, for continuing to choose the Tobago Updates morning show. And at this point, we want to remind you that this is your opportunity to share the live, share the live, share the live.